Hello, Hungarian scientists and innovators in Silicon Valley. How familiar is the following scenario for you? You have a great idea. Maybe you have the perfect plan. You can't wait to tell somebody. The occasion arises, you go, you tell your idea, you wait for the reaction, and the reaction is nowhere near you imagined it to be. Maybe the reaction is less enthusiastic. Maybe the person you talk to says, I don't understand. How frustrating is that? Today, I'm going to talk to you about how to get your messages across with impact and authenticity. My name is Szeremi, and I'm a communication trainer, and I'm talking to you from Budapest. It's a very strange setup because I'm alone in a hotel room, and I imagine all of you here sitting somewhere. Thank you, Csaba, for the invitation. So today, tips about how to get your messages across effectively. In my introductory video, I offered you a little game. If you remember, this was the game where one of you would be the tapper and the other would be the listener. The tapper will have to think of a song and tap out the rhythm of that very well-known song on a table. And of course, the listener has to guess what the title of the song is. And I'm really curious how many of you played this, and I would be really curious to ask you, what do you think, what is the correct percentage of the songs that were guessed correctly? Actually, this experiment was performed earlier at Stanford University in 1990, and the results were very surprising. Most people would expect that about half of the songs would be guessed correctly because they are well-known songs, right? Actually, the research shows that only 1 in every 40 songs were guessed correctly. That's 2.5%. It's not a very good percentage. Why is that? The culprit in this case is called the curse of knowledge. Yes, dear scientists and innovators, knowledge is of course power, but knowledge can be curse as well. Let me explain. When you tap out the rhythm of the very well-known song, you would really think that the other person will get it because you have an unfair advantage. This unfair advantage is that, of course, you hear the song in your head, and the other person, of course, doesn't hear the song. So you think it's so obvious, and you just cannot understand how somebody just doesn't get it right. And it happens to us all the time, in private life and in our professional lives as well. So the curse of knowledge can really hit us and actually can prevent us from communicating our ideas effectively. So what is the antidote to the curse of knowledge? I will talk in detail about that, but the most important thing, the antidote, is empathy. You have to be able to put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and imagine what the world is like from their point of view. Because a lot of times what we know is so obvious for us, it's so evident, that we forget what it was like not knowing this piece of information. So empathy is important, but there are a couple of other important factors when you want to communicate your ideas effectively. And of course, we are all familiar with the situation that we want to get the buy-in from somebody for our idea. So what are the factors that it depends on? I will argue that the buy-in happens on 2 levels. The buy-in happens on a personal level and on a professional level. And I will give you tips for both levels so that by the end of this talk you will have really actionable tips on what to do if you want to get your ideas across more effectively. So, first of all, let's see the personal level. I will project this on the wall. I'm not sure if you see it with all this lighting, but this says behind me, people buy people first. A lot of you may have heard this sentence before. Actually, it goes on like products, brand names, ideas come only second. So people buy people first. It means that before anybody has an opinion about your message, your content, your professional knowledge, they will have an opinion about you. And this opinion really counts because if they don't trust you personally, unfortunately the bad news is they will not be open to listen to your idea. So the order in which it's best to present our ideas is like this. So first, we want to establish the connection. We want to establish the trust. And only after the trust is established can we go on and we present our knowledge. What is the most frequent mistake I see when I run workshops on communication? Usually what happens, as you can probably tell from the introductory example of the curse of knowledge, people run to presenting their knowledge before they actually take the time to connect and to establish the trust. So what happens usually, okay, let me give you an example of what I see when people present their ideas with slides. A lot of times I see this. They start their presentation already facing not their audience, but facing the slide. And very politely, a lot of people, they just go away from the slide. They try to hide somewhere in the corner, okay? So actually the message they send from here is that I am just a slideshow commentator. I made those slides. And I would like the knowledge on these slides to pass onto your brains. So I'm actually going to go on the side, not to distract you from engaging with those slides. Does it sound familiar? You see this all the time. People just put themselves in the position of a slideshow commentator. And the bad thing about this is that, as I said earlier, people buy people first. You need to establish a connection with the audience. Now, if you hide on the side and the audience doesn't see you, of course you're not going to be able to make that connection with the audience. And you hope that the knowledge goes through from the slides to the audience, but research shows that that's not the case. So what's best actually, if you have to present and you have slides, it's best in the beginning to have nothing in the background. Nothing. Just like I have nothing in the background right now, so that I can stand in the middle, I can face my audience. A little concrete tip is that it's best to have your shoulders pointing towards the audience, okay? So if you were, for example, here in this room with me now, then I would try to make eye contact with all of you, and I would try to point my shoulders into the direction of my audience. Why? Not because I want to be a show person, a showman, or a showwoman. No. Because research shows that in order to pass my knowledge on to you, you need to accept me first as a person. So buy-in happens first on a personal level. And I see a lot of times that people are shy, people are nervous, and that's why they just don't want to take this pressure of standing here, standing in the middle, and really facing their audience. Just a little side note. Some of you who went to primary school and high school in Hungary, then you might be familiar with this institution called felelés. Right? I can see through the camera that some of you started shivering when you heard that word. Felelés is interrogation in school when you stand up in front of your peers and you present your knowledge. Of course, our memories tell us that when we did that in primary school or in high school in Hungary or in university, a lot of times what happened, if we didn't get the answer right, is that we got maybe humiliation. We got shamed for not knowing the answer. Think about what happens to a person when this person continuously experiences that whenever you stand up in front of people, there is a very real danger of getting humiliated. Of course, this person learns that it's best to go on the side, and it's best to let the slides talk. But unfortunately, it's not the case. So how can you make that connection? So first of all, I recommend that you have nothing in the background. You can do that technically through a lot of different tools. For example, if you're in PowerPoint, if you're in slideshow mode in PowerPoint, what you can do is you can push the B button for black and the screen will go black. Now, what I'm doing is I have this presenter, and usually on presenters, they also have a button which you can press, and then it goes black. Again, it's important because it gives you a chance to show yourself. And if you show yourself, the audience has an opportunity to get connected to you and trust you. How could they trust you? Why would somebody trust somebody who is presenting? I think there are basically two ways to establish the trust in the beginning. One is you can show your vulnerability. It's okay not to be perfect. It's okay to admit even that you're a little nervous before a presentation. It's okay to admit that you don't know an answer to a question. So by admitting, embracing our vulnerability, it will be easier for someone to relate to us. Or you can tell a story in the beginning which shows the audience who you are, what's your background. And therefore, again, they have a chance to connect to you. Of course, I'm not telling you to go into this long story which ends nowhere. You have to calibrate your story to the environment, but you don't have to do it all the time, okay? That's just one option that you have for establishing the trust. Another way to establish trust, besides embracing vulnerability, is showing the audience that you care about them. There is a saying which has been attributed to President Roosevelt and also Maxwell, the management trainer. This goes like this: people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Okay? Think about this. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It means that you can have the greatest professional knowledge in the world. You can be the smartest person in Silicon Valley. But if your audience thinks that you will apply this professional knowledge that you have to get what you want, to pursue a selfish goal, then they will receive your knowledge like this. They won't be open to listen to your knowledge. Think about the following situation. You go to a doctor and maybe it's a dermatologist. You want to have your moles checked. You go to the doctor takes a look at a couple of moles and then says, okay, that's nothing serious, so please just take some vitamin D and avoid the sun. And you went to the best dermatologist in Silicon Valley. You waited for this phone number. You were very happy when you got the phone number of this very, very famous dermatologist. You were a little excited and nervous before going to the examination room because you just knew that if somebody is so famous and so well established, they might not have a lot of time for you. Remember situations like this when you're stressed in the waiting room and actually you're rehearsing your lines. You're trying to rehearse, okay, I'm gonna say this because I know I'm gonna be under time pressure. Now, if the doctor doesn't spend time with you, or you think that the doctor just didn't pay enough attention to you, they can be the best doctor in the world, you will feel bad. When you leave their office, you will feel that, they have the biggest knowledge in the world. Yeah, no question. Maybe my problem is so little for them that I am not so important for this big time professor. And you don't feel good about this experience. So actually what happened is that the doctor's big knowledge is not a big help to you. Actually, it can be a hindrance. It can be a problem for you. Because you think that this doctor's knowledge is so vast that your little problem doesn't count. So we can run into this situation very easily. If we are well established, we are, sought after in our field. That's great. That's great. Obviously, we worked hard to get to that level of recognition. But we have to make sure that we demonstrate to the other person, we demonstrate to our audience we're talking to, that we care about their needs. So, a way to establish trust, remember we are still at the personal level of the buy-in, is we listen, we ask questions, we try to get to know their world, we try to get to know their problems, their issues. And in the presentation, in the conversation, in the pitch, we start focusing on them. And that's also a very common mistake that I see. People are so enthusiastic, they just want to get to the point. I want to get my message across, I want to give you the good news, I have this best solution, but they forget to describe the problem. So, focus on your audience first. Focus on their problems. Describe their problems as you see them. If you do that, then they might be open to listen to your knowledge. Because remember, this first stage, we're still at the first stage of establishing the connection. The first stage is about building trust. And trust is about good intentions. We are evolutionary wired, everybody, you also, everybody. We are wired to look for signs of good intention, always. Because a couple of 1,000 years ago, it meant life or death for us. If we could detect somebody is against me, somebody has bad intentions, somebody has good intentions. So it was vital for us to detect this. Now, probably in most situations, it's not as important, but still our brain works like this. And we look for signs of good intention. And you can show good intention by describing the person's problem empathetically, honestly. And of course, again, going back to point number one, you can establish your good intention by showing yourself, by putting yourself out there, by showing that you are a human being. So, finally, we are done with phase number one, which is buying at the personal level. The bad news is that actually we're never done with that, because we might have to revisit that phase continuously later when we sense that our audience is getting a little resistant. They are not that open anymore. Usually, one of the big problems is that they lost this connection. They lost that connection. They don't think anymore that what you're saying is actually be beneficial for them. So you have to revisit this first stage. But, good news, let's drink some water, because we will go to the second phase. The second phase is finally where you can showcase your competence. You can talk about your knowledge because the foundation of trust is already established. How do you do that? How do you talk about your knowledge? I'm not sure you can see perfectly on this. On one side you have Steve Jobs, the other side you have Bill Gates, and the famous comparison between them, that Steve Jobs and the Apple was very famous for putting emotions behind their descriptions, their product demos, and Microsoft was not very able to do that. Now I think it changed since then, but I just wanted to put that up for you to show the comparison. So we are at the stage where we establish the trust. So personally, the audience trusts us and we can describe what we can offer to us. The first phase was about, I want to help you honestly. I want to help you solve a problem which I see. The second phase, this phase, is about, I can do that. I am able to do that. I have the professional knowledge. And it says on this slide, stories are data with a soul. Brené Brown, who is a researcher of shame and vulnerability and who gave a fantastic TED talk on this subject, is the creator of this quote, which I like very much. Stories are just data with a soul. So it means when you're describing your big idea, when you're pitching a proposal, data are not enough. And I know that a lot of you are engineers in the audience, and you work with data all the time, and it's fine, it's great. But actually, in order to click with somebody else who probably doesn't have the same engineering background, data and facts are not enough. That's why we need something more. We can, tell a story, for example. Again, I'm not telling you that you should be a storyteller who just, out of the blue gives long and no-ending stories. I'm not saying that. But I know that at companies like Motorola or Nike, they train executives in storytelling because they are convinced that storytelling is the way through which complex ideas, company philosophies, company values can be transmitted more effectively. Why? because stories have emotions in them. Stories don't just speak to our brains, they speak to our hearts, and it's a very important criteria even when we talk about very rational subjects, because that's where the connection happens. So what can you do to spice up a little bit those facts, those numbers that you want to present at this stage? You can use, for example, metaphors or analogies. A metaphor or an analogy is basically a comparison. You compare two things, and by doing that, you basically take something which is very well known for your audience, and by comparing it to something which is not well known, you make it relatable for them. Are you familiar with the fact that the word desktop was actually coined by Apple? A long time ago, when the graphical interface was introduced, people just couldn't relate to the idea of navigating their computers that way. So the thought behind having the desktop as a metaphor is that, you know, you can imagine what you can do on top of your desk. You know, you can arrange things, and once you have that piece of information, basically you take your audience and you say, this is exactly what you can do with your computer. So metaphors and analogies are comparisons. I don't want to go very deeply into this, but metaphor is more like it's an implied comparison. It's not a direct comparison. So metaphor is like the curtain of night fell upon Silicon Valley. You all know that it's not a curtain, it didn't fall on Silicon Valley. Or the tech bubble. There's a lot of talk these days about the tech bubble. We all know that it's not a real bubble, but actually, by using this phrase, it's going to be easier for people to relate to what we want to say. So when you want to pitch an idea, when you want to give a presentation about a research project, I know a lot of you are researchers out there, try to think about, okay, how can I use a story to bring this idea closer to my audience? How can I use a metaphor, a comparison, which makes it easier to relate to? Let me give you another example. When the movie Speed was pitched in Hollywood, by Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, they pitched it like this. Speed is die hard on a bus. So they didn't try to explain. So speed is when you have somebody and you hop on the bus and it's, no. Would have been complicated. They would have made their job much more difficult. They took something which was very solid in people's heads. Die Hard, the movie Die Hard. Everybody had that in Hollywood, of course, in their heads. They said, you know what? We're going to make a movie which is Die Hard, but we're going to take it on a bus. So what you want to do with your idea, with your thought, with your product, is you don't want to be too far from what is known for your audience, because then you can explain and you can go into complicated terms, but you will alienate yourself. It will be too complicated. It's best actually if you guide your audience, take them by the hand, and make it really, really easy for them to understand what you're saying. So next time you're pitching, next time you're giving a presentation, think about what are the similarities to something that the audience already knows. How can I bridge the gap? How can I make my job easier? And how can I touch emotions and not just rational thoughts? All right, let's see. I give you a very concrete order in which I think if you're pitching your idea, you'll have a good chance of getting through. So the first one, the first step is establishing the common ground. The common ground is what we talked about. You show the audience that I understand your world, I understand your problem, I want to help honestly, I want to help you solve that problem. Okay? It's very important, as I said earlier, to start by focusing on them. This is what we mess up all the time, because we are human beings, because we have the curse of knowledge. Don't forget from the beginning, we have the curse of knowledge. We know so much. We know that our solution is so good that we don't want to spend time with the first phase. And then we are so frustrated that people just don't get it. They are just not enthusiastic about our idea. Usually the reason is that we skipped the first phase, or we didn't spend enough time in the first phase. So, common ground. I understand you, I understand your problem, I am with you. You're not alone with your problem. Number two, as you see, is the proposal, is the actual idea, as we discussed. It's best if it's not just, dry facts, numbers. It's good to also focus on the benefits. I know that many of you have heard this before, but I think it's worth rehashing, because I see it happening all the time, that people just talk about the features of a product or a service. Why? Because they spend 24 hours a day with that product and service. They love it so much, they know every single detail about it, and they just want to share their enthusiasm. That's why they describe the features. But the features are not exciting for the audience. What's exciting for the audience is the benefits. How this part of your product, your solution, will make them feel, how it's going to solve a problem they have. So that's number two. And number three is the implementation, the details. You go into that phase only when you realize that they are on board. They understand the idea. They understand why it's good for them, so they can't wait to listen to the details. What happens a lot is that we start with the details. Again, curse of knowledge, we are 2, 3, 5 steps ahead of the audience. We start with the details, we start with the nitty-gritty, because that's what's exciting for us, but that's not what's exciting for the audience. Finally, we are at the last part of my presentation, where I want to talk to you about delivery. So we talked so far about, what to say, how to structure the content. But of course, how to say matters a lot too. Let me show you a chart you might have seen before. Again, I'm not sure if it comes out on this. It's about the famous Mehrabian study. Albert Mehrabian of UCLA is a psychologist who did this experiment 50 years ago. You can see here. And the results are very much misinterpreted all over the world. Basically, the misinterpretation is, it doesn't matter what you say. What matters is how you say it. You hear it on training courses, you listen to podcasts, see it on the internet. People say that it doesn't matter what you say, it only matters how you say it. Ladies and gentlemen, it's not true. It's not true. It's a misinterpretation of Albert Mehrabian's famous study. Actually, what the numbers mean on this chart is, when people talk about feelings and attitudes, and then what they say and how they say differ, then people tend to believe mostly the how to say part. That's why it says here that the how to say, the voice and the body language, the delivery, counts for 93%, and the words, the content, counts only for 7%. Let me give you an example. If I say to you right now, I look into your eyes through the camera and I say, Dear scientists and innovators in Silicon Valley, I just love talking to you today. I really enjoy this presentation. What are you gonna think? Probably you're gonna think that Peter is not telling the truth because my delivery, my facial expression, my voice implied that I don't enjoy this at all. What if I say it like this? I really enjoy talking to you today and recording this video for you. Probably you'll believe that because what I said and how I said it were in harmony. But I talked about something where my feelings and attitudes were mentioned. Of course, when you give a professional presentation, these numbers will not hold up because you're not going to talk about feelings and attitudes, but there are instances where your feelings and attitudes will be part of a presentation, like how enthusiastic you are. You say, you know, to research, I'm confident that it will be done, and I'm really enthusiastic to get started on this. Now you're talking about attitudes and feelings, and it's really important to work on your delivery. It's really important to have good voice, to project your voice, to have body language, to have the facial expression that matches that, because you can have the best structure in the world, but if you talk like this. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me just present this proposal. How many teachers did you have who spoke like this, who were extremely smart, but you could not pay attention to them because you lost attention after a couple of minutes because their delivery was not good enough? So my message here is that it's important to rehearse your delivery, voice, body language, because if you want to get your message across, this is going to be an important element. So, I reached the end of this talk, and I hope that by listening to me, you were able to take away something. Take away that buy-in happens at a professional level, but before it happens at a personal level, and we just cannot skip this personal level. We have to demonstrate the good intent. We have to create the trust in order for our audience to open up to our knowledge. Otherwise, they are not going to listen to us openly, and that's going to lead to a lot of frustration. So, I imagine you might have some questions, and I really encourage you to write to me. The email address is here, but if you cannot read it, it's peter@seremipeter.hu. I think it will be under this video. So please write to me, write any questions regarding how to get your messages across, how to make sure that your ideas will be heard, and I will do another video where I will answer questions. So thank you very much for your attention. If you're watching this on Valentine's Day, then happy Valentine's Day. And it was a pleasure, and I hope to record a video soon with the questions, with the answers to your questions. Thank you very much.